Political analyst Professor Dirk Kotze is professor in political science at the University of South Africa, UNISA. He joins us now. Very good evening to you, Professor Kotze. Thank you so much for speaking to us. The president saying that he understands why a cabinet reshuffle or relook would be top of mind for South Africans. But I think for me, the most important thing is the reason behind it. Is there a hype that is incongruent with the necessities of a cabinet reshuffle, particularly the intrigue that we saw during the ANC's 55th National Congress?
Well, I think what many people have waited for was the outcome of the elections at the National Conference. That has happened now. We've seen also the election of the National Executive Committee, and some of the incumbent ministers have not been re-elected to the National Executive Committee. And then, as he indicated, in the case, there are two ministers, especially for Fikile Mbalula as Minister of Transport, who will become or is now the new Secretary General of the ANC and therefore cannot continue as a minister. So there's quite a lot of pressure on him and the necessity to reconstitute the cabinet. At the same time, I think given the conference itself and the resolutions it adopted, and the emphasis on the idea of renewal, both for the ANC itself as well as its position in government and its policies, that really calls for the idea of a new executive, a new government or a new cabinet. And I think what he is therefore saying is that this is on the cards. He says we must wait and see, but it's certainly, I think there is definitely a reason for that. Also with the position of the Deputy President, there's a new Deputy President of the ANC, and that will put a lot of pressure on him to appoint Paul Mashatile, the new ANC Deputy President, as the National Deputy President. But there's one step to follow, and that is that he must first become a member of parliament.
Professor Kotze, I asked the question that I asked at the onset because I want us to have a clear understanding not only on the role of ministers, the power that they enjoy, and the technocratic aspect of it. For instance, when it comes to the deputy president, as you say, there's some sort of pressure. Is there an expectation? What does precedence tell us?
Yes, there is pressure. I think what we have seen with respect to President Ramaphosa himself, when he was the deputy president, when he became the deputy president in 2012, after the incumbent deputy president, Kgalema Motlanthe, failed to contest the position of president with President Zuma, is that almost immediately afterwards, he did become the national deputy president in the place of Kgalema Motlanthe, who was not re-elected in any position at the 2012 National Conference. So that is with respect to the deputy president, that is the one precedent that does exist. In the other cases, the deputy presidents were re-elected and then followed on as presidents. So this is a relatively unique situation. It's only the second time that the deputy president is not re-elected, and based on the previous example of Kgalema Motlanthe, I think it is very much likely that Paul Mashatile will become the next national deputy president quite soon.
President Ramaphosa saying that we shouldn't be in a rush. He is going to apply his mind to this. This would obviously suggest that there is consultation underway as well. So as you mentioned, there are ministers who are no longer NEC members. What would sway his opinion? Because a lot of what we see is a conjecture around who should stay, who should go on, and on what basis. What is on the table when the president considers this decision, does his consultation?
I think first of all, when it comes to ministers, is that he must trust him. He must be able to work with him in a team. They must be regarded by him as team players that are very close to him. It is very difficult to work with persons that don't share your views, that there's no consensus, therefore, in the cabinet about very important matters. And that, I think, was the situation in the first part of President Ramaphosa's the first term, is that he knew that there are members in his cabinet who are not necessarily sharing his ideas, especially on the economy and also the way in which the ANC has been managed. And I think this is now the reason why he's saying, well, given the fact that he'd received quite a strong mandate from the National Conference, that he interprets that as that this time he can appoint persons that he believes are very close to him and will form a coherent team within the cabinet, which, as I said, he didn't have in his first term. But the main judgment is not necessarily whether they are experts in the field. Ministers generally are not necessarily regarded as experts in either, let's say, education or health or home affairs or international relations, but they must be good political managers. They must be able to provide good leadership for that ministry and that department. But then very much is the fact that President Ramaphosa must have confidence in them and must be able to trust them.
And what denotes a good political manager? We're often told that the markets are very interested and they almost give a thumbs up, thumbs down approach to the finance minister who is chosen. But it then takes me to this whole debate we've seen continuously about collective leadership vis-a-vis individuals who are pulling in a different direction, the whole separation of party and state. What litmus test is there as to whether somebody is in the right position and they are indeed following orders, given the fissures that already exist in the party?
Yes, well, when it comes to ministers, they are collectively responsible and accountable for what they are doing in their own portfolio. They are also individually accountable for what they are doing in the specific ministry and department. But then at the same time, they are also working in the cabinet is structured in terms of a number of clusters. There's, for example, the economic cluster or the social welfare cluster and others. And that is where the different departments or the different ministries come together and they cooperate and they work and they take decisions jointly. So it's very seldom that the department take decisions or even a ministry completely on their own. That's where the collective element comes in. But ultimately, it is a decision by cabinet. So the final decision maker on all executive matters is a collective decision by the cabinet. And ministers who are not able to agree with or go along with those decisions are actually expected to resign, to remove themselves from cabinet. And I think this is, again, some of the issues that we've seen in the past, which didn't happen, and why there was so much sort of disunity sometimes within cabinet about important matters.
President Ramaphosa has spoken in the past about contractual agreements where there is a performance assessment. I don't think as a country we've necessarily been privy to that. So when we judge whether a minister has done a good job or not, are they beholden to the socio-economic conditions under which they perform their tasks? Is there enough transparency around what we say is consequence management in their performance?
Yes, well, these performance agreements are publicly available. They are on the websites of the ministries normally. But over and above that, so there are let's say the objective criteria in terms of which a minister can be assessed. But then at the same time, there's also the public assessment of a minister by the public in general, by public opinion. And that's not necessarily focused on the detail of a job description or performance management areas that they are assessed with. But it's rather about what is the political role that they play, the political leadership or management role, again, that they play with respect to, let's take, for example, the energy situation or with the police or healthcare. And that is then a public judgment that's being made. And very often we see in the media and some of the media platforms that ministers at the end of the year are actually judged or graded. in terms of what they regard as the performance of those ministers. So there's different ways in which these are happening, but ultimately the final person to decide whether a minister should continue or not is obviously the president. And that is the very important responsibility of the president. So the president is ultimately responsible for what the ministers are doing.
As you say, they serve at his pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and insights, Professor Dirk Kotze, who's a political analyst at the University of South Africa, or UNISA.